Welcome back to the 127 Fit podcast. Today's guest is a professor of exercise science at the University of Sioux Falls in South Dakota. Today's guest is Dr. Rebecca Schultz. Rebecca, I want to welcome you to the 127 Fit podcast.
Thanks, Quentin.
So we're gonna jump right into things, Rebecca. I've got 4 questions that I kind of like to ask all of my guests just to kind of get the conversational ball rolling, so to speak. The first question that I have for you is, how do you start your day? Do you have a specific morning routine or morning ritual you like to stick to on most mornings?
Okay, so being a professor, I feel like there's Dr. Schultz's routine and then there's Rebecca Schultz's routine. And so during the school year, I have to get up earlier. I have to, so I set an alarm. I usually spend the first 15 minutes to 45 minutes just kind of going through my phone. Just to help me wake up, I stretch my feet. I've had, over the years, lots of issues with plantar fasciitis and stuff, so I do a good warm-up with my feet. I like to clear out my inbox, any unnecessary emails that I can take care of or quick responses. I go through social media, and I know sometimes, you think, oh, what do you do? Probably not a great way to start your day, but I actually follow a lot of Christians on social media and Christian sites. And so for me, it's hard for me to sit down and have a organized devotional time or anything, but to get little snippets on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, wherever it is, like little scripture verses or sometimes a little bit longer reflections that other people have posted from their morning devotionals. I use those, kind of catch up with what's going on in the world, a little bit of news. Then I get up, I feed the dog, I take him for a walk, and then I come back and kind of get breakfast. Usually I have 1 cup of coffee before I walk the dog, and then another cup when I get back. Get the kids, make sure the kids are up. We all get the chaos of getting out the door. Right. In the summer, I must confess, I just kind of get up whenever, and it's kind of the same routine, just delayed a little bit, and the kids are on their own for breakfast then.
Good deal. The next question I have for you, Rebecca, do you have a favorite book, or maybe there's a book that you're currently reading, or also, I know kind of the whole graduation season is kind of just behind us, but maybe there's a book that you like to gift often. So kind of like, and if there's more than one, or if you want to kind of answer all 3 or 1 or 2 of those questions, however you want to take that. Favorite book you're currently reading, or a book that you like to gift often.
Yeah, this one's a hard one for me. I've tried thinking about how would I answer this question. I guess if I had to pick one favorite book besides, I feel like I should say the Bible.
Right, yeah.
But, besides the Bible.
For sure.
A book I think that's always stuck with me is Angela's Ashes. When that came out, I read it, and I love it for a lot of reasons. I love kind of historical stories anyway, whether it's autobiographies, biographies, historical fiction. I just love history. But hearing his story and just this abject poverty he came out of, and but yet he wrote in a way that's funny. Like, you laugh out loud at these horrific moments of his life because of his way of writing, and being someone who I see the humor in things.
Right, of course.
And so, I just really connected with that, and then just seeing how he persevered through that upbringing, and having friends from Ireland, I connected with that. So I love that story. It sounds terrible, but I don't read a whole lot. I can't read during the school year because I love to read, and books draw me in, and I don't want to put them down. And then I can't prep for my classes or tend to my kids or my spouse or anything like that. So I usually don't read during the school year. My goal is to read a couple books in the summer and over Christmas break. Right now I'm reading the 3 years swim. Well, actually I'm listening to it. I've got my free Audible trial.
There
and
you go. Take advantage of it.
The 3-year swim club. It's about this group of back in the 1930s in Hawaii, individuals that were working. They were Japanese, Filipino, immigrant backgrounds or whatever, but they had a teacher who started teaching them how to swim in irrigation ditches, and then they went on to be like world-class swimmers. And so that story, as an exercise physiologist and someone who likes history, it's really fascinating.
Cool. Now, just quickly, Rebecca, the Angela's Ashes book. Now, you like referred to the person, but like who is it? Like an autobiography or like
it's supposed to be an autobiography. Frank McCourt was the author.
Okay, cool.
And he wrote a follow-up book that I didn't think once he came to America as a young man, and I didn't think that was as good.
Okay.
But his early childhood, they made a movie out of it, but the movie wasn't. I feel like the book really captures it. Yeah.
Cool. I just want to make sure that the listeners, I know we got the name of the book, but kind of who it was about, because you referred to the individual. So cool. All right, so the third out of the 4 warm-up questions here, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, or word?
This is, it's always the pressure of coming up. So
okay.
I like, there are a lot of scripture verses, I think, that I kind of run through my head throughout the day, depending on my scenario. And so I love quotes and all. I don't know if there's one in particular.
What's one of the verses that kind of resonates?
I guess when I read that question, I love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, body, and soul. And I think sometimes we try to compartmentalize God, and especially in academia, you see a tendency towards that. And whereas it specifically addresses with your mind and your heart and your soul, and not just one or the other.
For sure.
And so I just think, kind of an all-in type approach.
Now, so you just said that in academia, there's like maybe some compartmentalizing that goes on in terms of maybe like, the studies, and then like we'll just use the word religion, right? Now, so for all the listeners that are listening right now, like University of Sioux Falls is my alma mater. So I spent 3 years here because I went to a college before here, then I transferred in. And Rebecca was my academic advisor, so she's known me for a lot of years. So like I know now, I haven't been here. Obviously, I graduated 10 years ago, so I can only speak on when I was here. But the University of Sioux Falls, is a quote unquote Christian school, so there is that presence here. But can you maybe just explain a little bit more in terms of like that separation between the academics and then religion, and kind of like what do you? I mean, I know what you mean by that, but I just kind of want to hear it from your words. How, for you as a Christian who is in academia, and I know you teach at a Christian school, but even at a Christian school, I think there can be a lot of separation depending upon what school you go to. So how do you try to like, really make sure that people understand that faith is important to you, and it's an important part of the University of Sioux Falls, without maybe pushing it on them, so to speak, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So I think first and foremost, I do have the benefit of being at a Christian school where you can be unapologetic with your faith and open about it. But I think even at that, we're not exclusively Christian. We have many students who are not Christians. We have people who are strongly committed Christians, and kind of everywhere in between in that faith journey. And so I think first and foremost is, living out your faith of loving everyone where they're at.
For sure.
Where that is, and who they are. And I think just extending that's the first step, kind of like Christ showed us as, being love,
right,
and embodying that. But then also trying to speak truth into people's lives, that there is something bigger and maybe more important. For me, I care that my students get a degree and get a job, but really for me, the ultimate is knowing that someone's walking with Christ, and because that it has eternal consequences, not for the next 20 to 30 year consequences.
Sure. Yeah.
And so for me, but in academia, going to big universities to work on your doctorate and things like that, when in the field of exercise science, I feel like you don't get a lot into that, but in the social sciences and on the biological sciences, there can be some really anti-Christian sentiment, anti-creation sentiment, and not even getting into the weeds of creationism, evolution, those things, but just this core understanding that I try to approach everything as God is creator, and that if you look, I feel like the more we learn about the human body, the more, and the world at the microscopic level, there's no way it could just randomly happen. There has to be something more than this. You know, you can't just toss a bunch of Legos up in the air enough times and eventually you have this intricate design. Something has to, a force has to act on that. And so just looking at what marvelous creations we are. So within my field, we look at that, and that there's more than just a randomness. And if you apply a critical eye to it, like we're supposed to for things in our fields, you would see that.
Awesome. I love that. All right. So just to kind of like wrap up the initial questions here, Rebecca, the last question here, do you have a favorite or most listened to podcast?
Well, yours, of course.
Well, yeah, I know you gotta go through and listen to all like 150 episodes. So catch yourself up.
So, I'm really, I have not fully jumped on the podcast way, mostly because I'm in the car. Not that little short trips to and from. I'm carrying kids to school, so most of the time my kids are with me, and when my kids are with me, I don't necessarily want to listen to a podcast. That's usually the best time for conversation is with a kid in the car, when they're not distracted by electronics or friends and this and that. Sure. So, but there's been a few. I mean, I like to listen to anything related to. I've listened to some of yours, not all of them, but I've listened to some of them. I listen when I'm doing long trips by myself. Now I can't think of it, but it's like it's a current event news thing.
Cool.
That I've enjoyed, and if I think of it, I'll
like NPR News or something. Probably not NPR with you though, huh?
Well, they do tend to lean a little.
But something similar.
But I think it's actually it might be one of their things. It's almost like a game show. I can't think of it right now, but it's like a game show, current events, so. There's a little bit of that in there, but yet it's a lot of current events, so you kind of hear things that are going on that like are really obscure that you might not hear about otherwise. Cool.
Now, just before we kind of move on from here, is there, because you mentioned like when you wake up you kind of jump on some social media, there's some different we'll just call them like maybe Christian influencers that you kind of follow. Is there like one person that you can kind of think of just off the top of your head that you really find their message or kind of just like what they're putting out there really valuable each day or often?
I'm actually trying to be kind of careful about just putting too much stock into one person. You know what I mean? And so I like seeing a lot. I like the ones who quote scripture, and then maybe use it with some sort of just kind of encourager for how to maybe be a little more intentional in my walk that day.
Yeah, that's a good idea, because you can get like one person can just kind of take you in a
you never know
direction,
what exactly. So I think it's good to have some balance in there.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay, so Rebecca, we're gonna just kind of, what I like to kind of do with all my conversations, I kind of like to just start after the warm-up questions. I kind of like to just kind of start from the beginning, and then we're just going to kind of work our way up. So if you don't mind sharing with myself and the 127 Fit podcast listeners, just kind of like where were you born, where were you raised, kind of what were those younger years, what did they kind of look like, were you involved in sports, I'm sure you're probably involved in a lot of extracurricular activities, so just kind of like unpack a little bit of that childhood for us if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, my dad was in the Air Force, so I was a brat. I was an Air Force brat, and I lived all over. And so I was born in Panama City, Florida, at Tyndall Air Force Base. And so, but we only lived there a few months. We moved around quite a bit. I think in my first 18 years, we lived in 14 different places. Wow. And but we lived mostly all over the South. We lived in Germany from when I was 4 till I was 7. So that was kind of a key time in my life because I was old enough to remember it. We lived off the base, so I went to German schools. All my friends were German. I was fluent in German. Then we came back, lived around different parts of the South, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. We've lived in Alabama, Florida, 2 places in Florida, 2 places in Texas, I think, and so quite a bit. And then we moved to the Philippines when I was 12, and that was kind of a pivotal time too because it's middle school into my freshman year, and we left there when I was 15. And so that was kind of a key time. And then at that time, when we were leaving the Philippines, and we were there for the Philippine Revolution with Marcos, people who might remember Ferdinand Marcos, who was kind of this dictator in the Philippines for 30 plus years. And he was ousted while we were there. And so there was a lot going on. In fact, on spring break, my freshman year, we were all in lockdown because of the Philippine Revolution and things like that. But I got to go to Hong Kong for swim meets. I was in sports. I played soccer for a couple years younger. But, sports weren't as crazy back then as they are now. You didn't start sports when you're 4 and 5. Yeah. And so I played a couple years of soccer in elementary school. And then I was a swimmer for several years. I played water polo. And then I started playing basketball. I didn't start playing basketball until like 8th grade, 9th grade. I started band in 9th grade. I wanted to play an instrument. I'd played piano for my obligatory 3 years, but then I started band in high school. And so marching band became a big thing for me. When we left the Philippines, we moved to Pennsylvania, to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and marching band was huge there. And so I got into that and made a lot of great friends, people I'm still friends with today. And so that kind of was my...
Are you an only child, or do you have any siblings?
I had an older brother and an older sister, and they were quite 6 and 8 years older than me.
So you're the baby.
I was the baby.
Now, in terms of kind of like growing up, moving to a lot of different places, kind of in that military lifestyle. And I'm sure I know you're a very reflective person. You've probably looked back on those younger years at some point and kind of just maybe, done some reflecting. But maybe are there some positives, from those experiences, which I'm sure there are, and then are there some negatives? So like, kind of like just thinking, again, kind of off the top of your head, Rebecca, like what are maybe 1 or 2 of the positive things from that childhood and having that very unique experience? And then what are maybe from your perspective, maybe 1 or 2 of the negatives from that childhood?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, there's kind of this phenomenon known as the military brat kind of syndrome, and there's been a documentary made, in fact, about it. But I'll start with the negatives, then we can end on the positives. But this feeling of not having a home. So when people say, where are you from? Any brat has to stop and pause and like, well, how much do you want to go into it? Like, because you don't really know what to say. You're not really from anywhere, but you're from a lot of places. So then do you want to, go into that story? Sometimes you just say, oh, I'm from, and you pick one place. Usually sometimes I'll say, well, I'm from Minnesota, because that's where I finished high school, the last few months. So, it just depends on how much you want to go into that. So there's this feeling, I think, of detachment a little bit. And it took me a long time, in fact, living here. So I transferred after 2 years like you. I was a transfer in college. And then, I was grad school. So I never was anywhere more than 3 years until I lived in Sioux Falls for more than 3 years. Like in being married. And, my husband, after a little while, was kind of like, well, we need to move. I can't live here the rest of my life. It's like, what do you mean? And he's a South Dakota boy who, South Dakota boys probably, I don't know how Iowa boys feel, but like they never want to leave, Well,
I'm exception to that rule, but
But like South Dakota guys never want to leave. They see no reason. Like, why? This is the best place on earth, right? So, but there's this restlessness that I had to work through, and like I'm past it now. But there were several years of I didn't know if I could just keep living in one place for the rest of my life, even though we've moved houses a few times. But which segues though into the positives as well, is that I do know how wonderful so many places are. And and not only the places I lived, but the places I got to travel to because of where we live. So I got to go to swim meets in Hong Kong, so I got to go to Hong Kong twice when it was still, before it got turned over to fully Chinese rule and all. In Germany, we got to travel through Europe and different parts of the United States. And so I think just you learn to appreciate places and people. Probably the biggest takeaway though was living in the Philippines. The first night we landed there in the middle of the night, and we had to fly into Manila because we had pets, so we couldn't fly on the military planes. And you get there at midnight, and so it's by the time you get bags, there's a van that picked us up from the base, and there are children begging on the streets, in the middle of the night. And so we saw poverty like I've never seen poverty. We'd go into the neighborhoods and there would be kids 12 years old, just wearing a shirt, no pants or anything, and so people in shacks and with a TV antenna coming out of it, so just totally things you've never seen before in America and never would. Well, at least hopefully not. And so you just, I think, really learn to appreciate what we do have here and not take it for granted.
Now, kind of going back to the the faith aspect of things, was that something that was present in your childhood, or is that something that kind of came under the scenes, when you got older?
Yeah, for me, that was always there. My mother, especially, both my parents are Christians, but my mother was very vocal about her faith. My father was kind of came from a don't talk about religion and politics type background. My mother was very much every day doing her devotionals, talking about being, born again and the importance of accepting Christ. And so that was a big part of my upbringing. And so I think fortunately we went to good churches where the gospel was preached. And I don't remember like the exact age, I kind of, you always say, well, I kind of always believe, but there was that point when it was either third or fourth grade. So I remember when you move a lot, you remember things from where you lived. And so then you work backwards. Okay, I lived there in third and fourth grade, so it had to be, 8 or 9 years old. And our church, and I remember they were doing communion, and our pastor said, the only criteria for doing communion is you have to have accepted Christ as your personal savior. And I thought, well, yeah, and so that's the moment I always come back to where I kind of intentionally was yes, cool. I have accepted him. So for me, that was kind of always there.
Yeah. Now, before we kind of move on from the actual childhood conversation, again, like your dad being in the military and things like that, I'm sure, he probably wasn't always around maybe as much as some other dads just because of some of his things that he was involved with. But, kind of your mom, it sounds like, was very strong with the faith and shared that aspect of her life with you and your siblings. What was something that maybe your dad kind of instilled in you, or something that he kind of passed on to you, when you were younger?
Yeah, I think that kind of professionalism and everything that goes with that, with my dad, we always joke, like if he said we're leaving at 8 o'clock, that means you better be in the car ready to leave at 7:45,
Yeah.
And so, being on time, which means being early, doing your best, just working hard at everything you do. And so
cool. Awesome. Okay, so I want to kind of just get into like your academic path, so to speak. So graduate high school. I know you already mentioned kind of like you went to several different colleges, but let's just talk about college. I want you to just kind of talk about like where you went to colleges, all your colleges, kind of that college experience, and then I really want to kind of focus on how you got an interest in like exercise science and pursuing that aspect of things.
Okay. Well, first, so I was in Pennsylvania for 10th, 11th, and the first third of 12th grade. And so in, starting going into my, I guess summer after my junior year, we're looking at colleges. And so I found this college in Western Pennsylvania, about an hour north of Pittsburgh, called Grove City College. And we went and visited. We really liked it. I applied, got in early acceptance, and then we moved to Pennsylvania in November of that year, or to Minnesota. My dad's 30 years in the Air Force were up that following spring, and so he had started looking for jobs, and he found a job with Northwest Airlines.
Cool.
That's now Delta, but so it was a way for him to have a job, which he needed, and he had to retire from the Air Force within a few months. And so, and at the time he had said, I can, if you want to stay here in Pennsylvania, finish your senior year, we can get an apartment, you and your mom can stay. And, I don't know, like, I think like most parents, you always make you feel like you're poor every month. And I'm like, well, we can't afford that, so that's too much money. And so I just moved to Minnesota, which I did get some good friends out of that, but part of me, I think that's one thing I look back. I wish I just stayed in Pennsylvania and finished out that year. So I had applied to school. So I decided, I went back to Pennsylvania for college, my first 2 years. And I changed majors about 5 times those first years. And so I think that's what makes me a good advisor, because like, I know people can come in saying one thing, but I every other day I was changing my mind, and because I had a lot of interests, things I thought I could be good at. Yeah. But underneath there was always this, I'd been an athlete, but I'd also helped out in the training room in high school. And I always kind of enjoyed this idea of sports medicine, whatever that meant. I didn't really know what that meant, but I know I liked the idea of it. So in my spring of my sophomore year, I was kind of like, they didn't have that at my school. And I'm like, I'm not sure this is the right place for me. I think I want to transfer. And so my mom started asking around for schools with a sports medicine program. Yeah. And someone mentioned to her that the University of North Dakota had a really good athletic training program. So on my spring break that year, we went up there and checked it out, and decided I would transfer there for my junior year, which the program was a 3-year program, so I ended up being 5 years in undergrad. Loved Grand Forks. It's UND is a really neat school, and Grand Forks is wonderful, except for, from November to April. It's pretty miserable. Time, right? Yeah. That was kind of miserable, but so I went to school there. And while I was there, I dabbled between thinking I wanted to go on to PT school. Okay. Yeah. And at first I thought I wanted to go to PT school, but at the time you basically had to have a 4.0 or you weren't going to get in. And so as I looked at my options, and I was having to take a few more prereqs, I had like 21 credits one semester. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And so then I thought, well, I don't know if this, and I knew I didn't want to be an athletic trainer long term. Just sitting around waiting for people to get hurt, I just didn't enjoy that. And so then I looked at getting, I don't know why, but I thought, a master's in like cardiac rehab. I'm like, that sounds great. I had no idea what cardiac rehab was. Yeah. So I started looking for graduate assistantships, and just wherever I could get, because with an assistantship, they pay for your school and you get a little stipend, to live off of. And so I ended up getting one at Southern Mississippi to be the trainer out at a high school, and to get my master's at the University of Southern Miss, which for people who don't know was the home of Brett Favre and there you go. And Jimmy Buffett briefly before he got kicked out. And so, awesome. So I ended up down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and got my master's there.
Okay, cool. So, before I move on past that point, like. And I know you went to several different colleges, but like overall, did you really appreciate and did you really enjoy your college experience, or was it more kind of just like you're just there to get your degree and kind of
Oh, I loved college. Loved college.
Okay.
So, freshman year, that's one of the things, like I have, you and I were talking, I have a daughter who just graduated high school, and for her, my biggest fear is she's not going to get to have the freshman year experience. And that to me was so much fun. And, some schools are having students live in single dorm rooms and stuff. I'm like, I don't know. There's just something about having that roommate there to goof around with. And I was kind of the practical joker of my hall, and like we were always, I was.
That's funny.
We were always doing, we were short sheeting our RA's bed. One time we moved their bedrooms into the bathroom. Like we put their mattresses fully made up above the toilet stalls, and like even with their pillows, the stuffed animals.
That's
like
funny.
We emptied out their entire rooms and moved it to a different floor once. I mean, we did all kinds of stuff. And, like, I loved college. Like, to me, like, college was about having fun.
Yeah.
And so...
So, I mean, because that's and the reason why I kind of wanted to ask you that, Rebecca, is because, I mean, obviously, now that you've spent a lot of years out of college being a professor and things like that, there had to be some sort of, like, positive, influence or experiences in your college time to kind of guide you in this direction, right? So that's kind of, I guess, why I kind of wanted to, ask you about that. Now, so you go get your master's degree, your athletic training at a high school, correct?
Yeah.
And so then, what was kind of the, the impetus behind you moving on to get your doctorate, and then, kind of moving on from the athletic training scene?
Yeah. So for me, I was someone who always, some faculty are geniuses, like geniuses. Right. I am not a genius by any stretch of the imagination. I have slightly above average intelligence, but I'm a hard worker. But I also am a good memorizer. So all through high school, undergrad, I got by because I can memorize well. But I didn't really learn,
Yeah,
and
I do know.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do, yeah.
So I got to my master's degree, and I think it was the first or second semester, I took a cardiovascular physiology course. And so I was working at this train at this high school, but I was in this class, and our professor, this crazy Greek guy, he came in and he was like, you can't take notes, you can't have your book open, you just have to listen. So he would lecture, and then, and it was once a week, and then outside of class, then we'd have to gasp, open our books and read them, and then try to make sense of what he had said. And so for the first time in my academic career, I started reading. Like I always tell my students, I learned how to read in grad school, and because I never opened my books, like many people can relate to, like if I could get by without my textbook, I didn't crack it open. And for the first time, I had to crack it open, and there was this moment of, wow, there's a lot of information in these books.
Right.
Wow, this is amazing, And then I just really fell in love with learning about the body. And one of the other students in my class, he was a graduate assistant in the lab, and they were getting ready to do a research study. He goes, oh, you should, he was like telling the rest of us about it. He goes, you should come in and help. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting. So I'm like, sure, I'll come along. And then at some point, and my advisor, I borrowed this big book. He'd go home to Greece every summer, and I borrowed this big biochemistry for medical sciences book or something. I just started reading it that summer, and I just really just fell in love with learning about the body. And it wasn't so much for me about going on to get a PhD.
Yeah.
It was more, I want to learn more.
Yeah.
And so for me, I never cared about the degree. It was just, I want to learn more. And so I loved learning about the body and how it worked.
Cool. And so when you kind of gained this interest in learning, was kind of then that kind of spurred you on to want to go get a doctorate degree, or was it kind of something else?
No, that was what it was, because then I'm like, I think I want to go. Because he was encouraging me to go on, and I'm like, no. Because I never thought I'd want more than a undergraduate degree. I just thought I'd do what my mom did. You meet your future husband while you're in college, and then you raise kids,
Yeah.
And so that was my goal. And then, things didn't work out that way. I did not meet my future husband in college or grad school. And so... I just kind of, well, what do I do now?
Yeah,
and you know, this seems like the next, you know, put off, you know, going out the road. I don't know. God just kind of opened doors in front of me. But my advisor had kind of I've always been blessed with people, I think, thinking more of my abilities than I thought of them,
Cool.
you know? And so, and he was like, you need to go on. I'm like, and then he gave me that book and he left for the summer and I read the book. I'm like, I think I need to go on because I just wanted to learn more, really.
So what was the going to get your doctorate degree? What was that experience like? Because I mean, all I have is an undergraduate degree, and you know, people that go get a master's, people that go get a doctorate. Like, I mean, for me, like getting an undergraduate degree, like my parents didn't go to college, and it was a big accomplishment for me.
Absolutely.
And you know, college for me, there was some high highs and some low lows, and on graduation day, you know, it was a huge accomplishment for me. And you know, there's some tough, you know, classes and things like that. But what I'm trying to say is that, you know, people that go get a master's degree, I can only imagine kind of the step up academically from undergraduate to graduate, and then graduate to go get a doctorate. So kind of what was the academic step for you? Was it pretty tough, or, you know, was it a pretty smooth transition? And then kind of what was that experience like in terms of like really digging into, you know, in-depth studying like a pretty specific topic or subject? Yeah.
So for me, I always liken it kind of to an onion, and you're peeling back layers. So like in undergrad, you're learning kind of the outside of the onion and little things. And then each time you go up in a level on a topic, you know, you're kind of peeling back a layer, and then you see, oh, there's all these more layers underneath. This isn't all there is. There's and then those layers are interconnected, and it gets more complex. And so for me, I always tell people, you know, if someone tells you they understand everything about the body, they're lying, because, you know, that's why we have to have specialists in medicine, because the body's so complex, and there's so many things we still don't know that they make assumptions about, but we just don't know. And so for me, I went to Penn State for my PhD, and you had to kind of interview. They flew you up, and you know, they interviewed you. You got to tour around because they want to make sure it's a good fit for you. It's a good fit for them because you spent a lot of time together. And the program I went into was amazing. Like, we were doing awesome stuff. We were doing these all-day procedures. We're infusing people with insulin and glucose, radioactive materials, markers, so we could trace where things go. We did muscle biopsies. You know, it was a very medical, clinical type research and really exciting. But, you know, we were putting in like 18-hour days too, one of these procedure days. And most of the time I wouldn't even go to class because I was so busy in the lab. And I felt like that's where I was really learning so much. And actually kind of a full disclosure story. I always did really well. You know, I was doing great in school, but we had candidacy exams for your PhD. So I'd already done comprehensive exams for my master's, but then for your PhD, like usually at the end of your coursework, or at Penn State, they kind of had during your first year, you take this kind of test to make sure that you belong there. Kind of, they want to make sure that, okay, you've got enough knowledge to move forward. And so there was a group of us, a bunch of us had come in together. You know, we're studying together, and, you know, I'm explaining things to people left and right. And then we had our written exam, and then we had our oral. And I go in with this group of faculty, you know, who are like world renowned. And I go in there and I just froze. Like, I couldn't, simple question, like my advisor just kept looking at me like, what is happening to you? And like simple thing, I think if they had asked me my name, I'm not sure I could have said it. Like simple physiological concept. They kept trying to make it easier for me, and I just couldn't answer anything. So I came out just crying. You know, my best friend was next, and she's like, oh my gosh. And so my advisor he goes, well, what was that? And I'm like, I don't know. He goes, well, we couldn't pass you. And I go, I know. So they did allow me to retake them because they knew I was capable of better. But then I passed them fine. But, you know, I think that's a good lesson for people. Like, you know, failure's okay, and it actually makes you better. It's, you know, failing at something is not the end of the world, and it doesn't mean that that's not the right thing for you. It just maybe there's things that you need to do better, or need to work on. So
So I want to hit on that point a little bit more. So, kind of like in that moment, because this is great. I love that. Failure. I actually just put something on my social media stories today. I think it was yesterday about, being willing to fail or something like that. And different people will look at failure in different ways. Some people say, failure doesn't really exist, right? Either you learn in everything, and it's just kind of an experience. But in terms of just kind of like failure, so how did you kind of like, because that seems, maybe it's not, but to me, just in this conversation and in this moment, like that seems like that was a pretty, and especially at that time, and you're trying to pass this exam, and you have all these professors, and you've studied and all this stuff. That seems like that was probably a pretty pivotal moment where you walk in there and you just kind of freeze, right? How did you kind of overcome that? And then how has that kind of, that quote unquote failure or that life experience at that age, how has that maybe played into your life experiences later on? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think it's, to answer the last part first, I think it was critical for me to be a professor, to have failed. I think sometimes for some academics, they were always the best, and they don't understand what it was like to be a normal, typical student. And I feel like I was a normal, typical student. The only thing that saved me was I was a good memorizer. But, I didn't have all A's going through school. I didn't, I had a C in high school. I had a C in college.
You're getting down to my level.
I know.
You have to have
maybe
some
not in
D's
high school. I think I had 1 or 2 in college, but
Okay.
like general psychology, I got a C plus, I wasn't perfect. And I pulled all the tricks, I know how to try to extend out your paper and make it look longer than it is. So I know when students are doing it,
I love it.
I just assume everyone's trying to cheat the system because sleeping in class, there's a way you prop your pencil to make it look like you're taking notes or, or being distracted. Like I was always in La La Land, And so I think, those things happen to me to help me relate to, I have a little more, I think, patience when students mess up, because I'm like, listen, you'll be okay. Try to work through this. Not like, well, you have no business being here. And I think I understand, and the fact that I didn't mature academically till grad school. So it's okay to be a bonehead in undergrad, I think a little bit, And because, we expect people to be fully grown up and mature at 18, and when we know that their brains aren't even done forming.
Kids,
yes,
right?
exactly. Yes, I don't know why we're in such a rush to grow everyone up, but
amen to that.
So that at the time it was devastating and embarrassing, but I was just for one, I was blessed with people around, like all my friends and they're like, how did this happen to you? They're like, no way, you belong here, because you are questioning, like, should I even be here? And you kind of go through this self-flagellation thing of, there was this opportunity to go over to this thing in Europe, and I didn't apply for it. I'm like, no, I don't deserve, I have to stay and study. And, and there's just little things like that.
Of course.
And then also the faculty were really great, and they were just, I think they saw how hard I worked, and they knew that I just, and so they were really, even like the faculty that were a little less approachable were just really nice. They sat down with me. Here's what you need to know. Make sure you're good on this, and just to kind of, I think, help relieve whatever anxiety I inexplicably had had. But I think also I've just always had this comfort, and I think it's fed by my faith. I just have this confidence, and I don't worry about things like a lot. We were just talking about with coronavirus, things like that. I'm not a worrier by nature.
Right,
I mean, to some degree, yes. Like when my daughter's driving home and I don't know where, that you don't breathe from the time she leaves the place she's leaving till she gets home. Though that's different with your kids.
For sure,
but for myself, I've never worried. Like, I've always just thought if you work hard and you act with integrity, everything's going to work out okay for you, and if you just try to keep Christ at the center. So those are things I just try to do no matter what, even if it's, I'm not the best at, doing my own devotionals, Bible studies, reading the Bible, you know, things like that. But like my mindset, I think, is always in the right place and always trying to do the right thing, that the rest kind of takes care of itself.
Awesome. And, you know, Rebecca, like, this is why I love, you know, kind of the podcast platform and really, like, providing people an opportunity to kind of share their story. Because, like, you know, obviously in the past, like, you were my professor, I'm your student, and, like, in that type of a relationship, you know, it's, I don't want to say it's weird, but you kind of, you know, a teacher or a professor, you kind of think of them in a certain way, right? And you're like, oh, they're a college professor, they're a doctor, I got to call them doctor, and all this. I don't want to say you put them up on a pedestal, but they're kind of up here, and you're kind of down here, right? Yeah. So that's why, I mean, I just love this opportunity to have this conversation with you, because it's like I'm kind of, and my listeners are kind of getting this behind the scenes of your story a little bit in terms of like, hey, like, I wasn't maybe always the smartest, and I had to really work hard, and, you know, I kind of froze on this big, you know, presentation or test that I had. And so I think that's really cool, you know, to be able to get a little bit of that behind the scenes of your story, especially for me, because, you know, I was in your classes and things like that. And, you know, I want to speak on this relatability, and I think it's really cool how you've had all these different experiences. You've really, sounds like, had some great professors, great mentors, great people in your life, and these experiences have really, I think, shaped who you are today in terms of a professor. And I can speak on this because, like, so I have my biological mom, my Iowa mom, and then I always say that I had a South Dakota mom, which that's you. And then when I lived in Colorado, I have my Colorado mom, right? But I know for myself personally, you know, when I came to USF, I almost, before I even took one class, got kicked out for partying. So that's one thing. But I was just, you know, I was very immature, and I was a knucklehead, I was a bonehead, I was all kind of all the things, right? Yeah. But I know, you know, the way that you approached me was that you kind of, like, what I think you kind of spoke on this earlier when we were talking about faith, is like you kind of just met me where I was at. You know, I'm sure you probably heard some different things about me. I kind of came to USF with a reputation, and then, you know, Chad was somebody, Chad Traver, somebody that went to high school with me, and then he was already here, and, you know, like I said, I almost got kicked out before I took one class for partying and being an idiot. So I kind of had this reputation, but, you know, this relatability I think is so important, not only as a professor, but, you know, just in life. I think it's important for us to just, you know, really meet people where they're at and allow people to be people. And I just want to, you know, magnify that. That's the experience I had with you, is that, you know, you have that, you know, you're a mom, and you were a mom at the time, you're a mom now, you're always going to be a mom, and you kind of always had that. I felt like you were, you know, like I said, I call you my South Dakota mom, but you never really, I never remember you kind of like, you know, like busting my butt or like really yelling at me, but you kind of just talked to me calmly. And again, what kind of keeps coming up to my head is like, you just kind of met me where I was at. And I think, you know, those experiences in terms of some things that you've gone through kind of helped you be, you know, relatable to me and relatable to hundreds and hundreds of students that you've had. So that's kind of cool to hear that behind the scenes of how, you know, that some of those experiences in your younger life kind of shaped, you know, who you are today. And that's the person that I really experienced. So you're very welcome. That's cool, because, like, again, I just think about Dr. Schultz, Rebecca Schultz. I'm like, she just kind of like, she just met me where I was at. She never, like, you know, chewed me out really, but she just, you know, I kind of knew who you were. I knew what you stood for. I knew that you had high expectations for me. And you know, you were just like a solid figure in my life during this time at USF. So that's cool, and thank you for that.
Thanks.
You know,
I should say I would definitely was not always like that. So
right. Of course,
there was a lot of that is learned. I think, you know, people would tell you in my younger days I was edgy, you know, maybe a little Clinton-like, and
I don't know about that.
A little too much.
Not that extreme.
Well, not like.
Okay.
Not too much.
Okay.
Quentin-esque.
Yeah.
And but. I think, you know, you learn a lot of times. Sometimes I sit back and marvel. Like, there was a time where you start to realize, like, wow, I have some amazing friends. Like, I don't deserve these people. I think you start to realize, like, what are the qualities I appreciate about them? And, you know, starting to try to take on those qualities. And I think, like, other faculty who I could see really connecting with students, you're like, what are they doing that maybe I'm not doing? You know, initially, I'm sure the students who had me that first year do. In fact, we've talked about that. You know, I think they had a different Rebecca Schultz than you had and that have now, because you learn how to navigate those waters that I kind of do, I think you're right, that tough love, a little bit like I'm going to love you where you're at, but I have high expectations for my students, and I think students want that.
Absolutely.
I think when we make it too easy, like that's not, it may not always be what we like. Well, you can make the training analogy. You're not going to get stronger by lifting a marker, doing bicep curls with a marker. You got to push yourself, and sometimes that doesn't feel good, and sometimes that hurts, and it makes you uncomfortable, and you have to do things you don't want to do. But you come out better for it. And so I kind of take that same approach then into just trying to help develop students into getting them ready for life after college.
Love it. And I know too, like I'm not the only one. I know, like when I was even at USF, like students and stuff always spoke very high of you, and that's something that you should be proud of, and I know that you would thank God and just again some of your mentors and some of your previous experiences for all that. But I think it's important, if you really truly appreciate another individual to verbalize it, because life is crazy and there's all kinds of ups and downs, and even the people that we look at on social media or we look at just in life and we think they have it all together, no, we don't all have it together. We're all trying to figure things out. We all have struggles, and so that's why I just want to verbalize on my podcast, on this podcast during our conversation. I just want to make sure I verbalize, like, I know I'm not the only one. Even like I said, when I was at school, people always spoke highly of you, and that's something that I just again want to thank you for, and I want to recognize you for, Rebecca.
Well, thank you. That means
you're very welcome. Yeah. Okay, so I want to so you get your doctorate degree, and it's in exercise science. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I didn't. Well, okay, so I was at Penn State for 2 years, and then I just kind of, there was this moment where my advisor, I was in his office, it was like midnight, and I was helping him get ready for this talk he was going to give at Harvard or something, and turns out it was a job interview, but but at the time we just thought he was giving a talk. But when I'm sitting there giving the data, looking over his slides, and I just thought, what am I doing? This is not what I want my life to look like. I don't want to be in a lab from 4 a.m. until midnight, 2 or 3 days a week, and I want to have a family. And so I just had to start thinking about, is this really what I want? At this time, I was kind of in this relationship with a guy from college who lived out in North Dakota. We were trying to see if and so I was in Pennsylvania, he was out there, and it didn't work out, and it ended pretty soon after I made my decision. But I feel like God maybe used that to get me out of a situation that was probably toxic for me long term, and just not being a good setup. So I went back home to the Twin Cities where my parents were living. And I always liked, we moved to the Twin Cities like November of my senior year, and so of high school. So I was only there in the summers. I'd had a summer job at Valley Fair, the amusement park, and it's fun to go into Minneapolis, St. Paul, to go out to eat or something. So I thought, that'd be a neat place to live, and so I thought, I'll just move back there. I'll get a job in cardiac rehab, And as I moved back and I looked at living there instead of just being home for vacation, it was a wholly different feel. I'm like, gosh, I gotta try. There's so many people. And so then I just started looking like around the region. I'm like, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota.
No Iowa.
Maybe I probably did. I don't know. You know how Minnesotans feel about Iowans. So then, so I was just looking. I saw there was a job opening in cardiac rehab in Sioux Falls at then Sioux Valley, now Sanford. And so I thought, well, I'll apply, called, talked to him. Came down, interviewed. I loved Sioux Falls. Got the job. So I moved and worked in cardiac rehab. For 3 years. While I was doing cardiac rehab, there was a little bit, I don't know how to describe. We had some interns, and I loved working with the interns from the colleges, from USF and Augie, and I'm like, I love that. I love teaching like one-on-one and things, and so then I thought, I think I want to teach, that's what I want to do. And so I started looking for jobs, and so USF had a job opening, and I applied for it. But then, and I got the job, but part of getting the job was finishing my doctorate.
Yeah.
And so then I had to go back. So I talked to Penn State. We talked about finishing it through them, but it was going to be a nightmare, long distance, most of the faculty who I had known and worked with had either already left or were getting ready to leave. And so then I met a guy through USD who was doing research on heart failure with rats. And I thought, I've got to finish my PhD. I need a dissertation. Yeah. And so we started talking, and I ended up enrolling at USD. And then the rest, they say, is history. But so I was teaching here.
Okay.
I started in 2001. And then I had to start working on my doctorate.
Okay.
And also then I had my daughter in 2002, so that I was navigating being a mother, driving back and forth to Vermilion, teaching classes for the first time. And
now, when you started teaching at USF, was that in the exercise science department then?
Yeah. So initially they there was, what happened was I actually didn't get the job I applied for. So initially they told me you didn't get it, and Kelly Quick got the job.
Okay.
And but then they called another person who was here, who was in the athletic training. He resigned, and so they called me. They're like, "Hey, we have another opening. Would you be interested?" And so I was at UND. I got my degree in athletic training. So I was like 3/4 teaching, 1/4 athletic training when I started here.
Okay.
But if anyone's ever been an athletic trainer, you can't put a number on the hours. So I was like full-time athletic training and full-time teaching, Yeah. And so I did it for 2 years, and then they said I could be done, like a year and a half, and then I just went to full teaching.
So what was your, before we just fully, because we've already been going close to an hour, before we kind of just, focus on the being a professor and teaching at a college and stuff like that. What was that cardiac experience at? I don't know. What was it? Sioux Valley.
Sioux Valley at the time.
It's now Stanford College. What was that? I mean, were you like in ER? What was that kind of experience like? What were you specifically doing?
Okay, well, they have primarily it's outpatient cardiac rehab, but then shortly into my time there, I ended up doing mostly inpatient. So and I ended up on the surgical floor. So after someone had open heart surgery, I would work with them until they went home. So to make sure they're stable, they could move around, get their stamina up, so they're safe to go home. Sometimes I worked in outpatient. But I loved the inpatient, the medical. It was very medical, everything. There's tubes and hoses, and they're on EKG hookup all the time, and so I just love the hustle and bustle of the hospital setting.
Cool. Okay, so let's. I just kind of. I want to just. We're going to focus most of the rest of our time just kind of like on the. Your experience here at the University of Sioux Falls being a professor. I've got a few questions I kind of want to touch on in terms of kind of like college in general. Okay, so in terms of like being a professor and teaching in a college, like let's just talk about maybe like your first 2, 3, 4 years, because I know those first couple of years you were doing the athletic training. So let's just kind of focus on like when you didn't have to do the athletic training, you were just kind of full-time professor. Once you kind of like got into the flow of teaching on a college campus and stuff, was there kind of like a moment, Rebecca, where you kind of felt like, this is what I'm meant to do, and you really kind of got into your flow, or did it maybe take quite a long time to kind of feel like this is where you're supposed to be?
I think I felt it all along, to be honest with you. I think, there's definitely a steep learning curve when you first start teaching. I always talk about like the new faculty syndrome. We come in out of graduate school and you've been operating on this high level and very deep level of knowledge. And then you have to I think the biggest learning part of that is reminding yourself that, okay, I'm not teaching graduate students. I'm teaching 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And resetting, like, okay, where was I at that age? And what did I understand? And that's where I feel like maybe maybe an advantage I have is because it didn't all come easy to me. I didn't understand exercise physiology. I got an A in it, but I didn't really know what I was learning until my master's degree. And I looked back at my notes. I'm like, wow, we learned a lot in there, And then it started to make sense. And then I learned it again, and in my PhD. And I'm like, oh, now it makes sense. And then it's not until you're teaching it, you're like, oh. So, but you have to remember, like, these people are hearing it for the first or second time. And so just, I think, working through that process. But I think I always felt comfortable with that. And just, again, I think just my work ethic of understanding, I think the biggest thing is, I think it's a lot of work to do it well. But then there's that really good feeling of when when it just clicks and people are getting it, and that aha moment for students. I think that's where, for me, like, if a student's in your office coming for help, and the first time, and I couldn't even tell you who it was, but the first time that happened, it's like, I think that's probably that moment of yes, this is where I want to be and need to be in.
How do you I can't really recall. I mean, I know I had, I sat in your classes and stuff, but I was most of the time probably checked out. But so I can't really speak. I can't speak on like my class experience with you. But how do you, somebody like myself that maybe is not fully interested in being in a exercise physiology class or whatever, or maybe they're just not focused on college a whole lot, more worried about sports or partying or whatever, or somebody maybe that's just really focused on academics, but they're just struggling. How do you take, like, what you've learned and kind of, what is there a process, or is it maybe after all these years it's maybe second nature now, but just maybe a way that, because I was a PE teacher, so that's quite a bit different than being a professor in college, but still, like,
not really.
There's terminology, like I had to go through that kind of on a lower level. I had to go through that experience where it's like I can use these words, because I was, my first semester PE teaching, it was K through 5th grade. So I'm trying to, I want to try to educate the kids a little bit, right? Not just play games. And I'm using these words. I'm like, wait a minute, Quinn, like they don't even know. Yeah. So I think that maybe is a simple, kind of like, example of my life where you have to kind of take it. Now you're working with older kids, you're on a college campus, there's higher expectations, but how do you kind of like simplify things or break things down, some difficult concepts, so that the kids can grasp this stuff and maybe really gain that, interest like you did at one point in learning?
Yeah, I think, my oldest, her kindergarten teacher asked me once, well, what do you do? And I said, I teach at USF. And she goes, what's that like? And no one had ever asked me that before. And I had to stop and think, and I'm like, it's probably a lot like kindergarten. Because there's some students, you have to get them focused and interested and understand, get them to sit still, get them to wake up, pay attention, and to simplify. And I just think I always, and again, it's a lot of this has been talking to other like I try to talk to other faculty all the time and teachers. Smart, like, what do you do? What do you? Simpler is better. Like, what just someone early on was like, what are your goals? Is it to show how much they don't know, or to help them understand? Great and so point. I just try to bring myself back to that, like, does it really matter if they know the technical terminology and this, that, but they just understand and can explain? So in our field, you have to be able to explain to people, okay, why shouldn't you grip the handlebars too tightly on a treadmill or on your weights? Why is it important to have a loose grip? And so, like, you got to be able to explain it to grandma and to like people who have no physiological knowledge. And I think part of it helped me at the hospital. They asked me to put together an exercise brochure. And when you put together a brochure for a hospital, it has to be at like a 3rd or 4th grade reading level. And you wouldn't think it, but even like the word exercise can like get flagged as too complicated. So you have to, and heart rate and things like that. So I think going through that exercise helped me to see, simplify. Even for really smart people, they can take it to the next level, but you have to target, like, I want to hit my biggest audience. The smart kids, we can work on the side. The ones who get this stuff easily, and most don't get it easily, I think. So we have to work, and then you can take it to the next level. But for most people, let's make it as simple as possible. Because even if you really get it, what's wrong with just being able to simplify it? So
I love that. And the thing is, I think just some people, just with their intellect, just the way their mind is, some people they can't simplify. Like, I remember sitting in geometry class in high school, and I remember this guy's teacher's reputation was like he should be a college professor because he was kind of the type where it's just like he's gonna teach, and if you don't get it, like you're gonna get left behind.
Bad,
and I remember sitting in that class, and I didn't care that much about school, but still, like you don't want to be like so overwhelmed where it's like you feel like you are being left behind.
It made you care even less.
Yeah, and then there's just there's kind of with some people, teachers, professors, there's this aura about like I am higher than you, and I'm kind of like the master, and like if you can't learn, like you're gonna get an F, and I'm getting paid no matter what. So that's I love that being able to simplify things, because that's what I found with myself, because I'm a very simple guy. I'm never going to be at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, training those type of athletes. But my experience has been kids, and then my last experience in Denver personal training was with seniors. Yeah. Well, with kids and with seniors, like it's so all rewarding. Simple.
Yes.
Like you got to break it down. Even for me, it's like you kind of get into the fitness space. You start using certain language. Even like going back to faith. Like there's what they say, like Christianese. It's like, well, dude, somebody that's struggling with drugs or on the streets or whatever. Like you try to go talk to them Christianese and all these Christian church terms. Like they don't care. Yeah. They don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And they close off.
Keep it with, hey, God loves you, and come to Jesus. So it's the same thing, kind of like. That it sounds like what you're saying is like when you're teaching and with academia, is just really trying to break things down and simplify it so that everybody can learn and understand. Because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the success of the students is a direct reflection of you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you have all these kids that are failing and struggling and this and that, like at some point as an instructor, like it goes back
like
on
then
you,
I'm
right?
failing.
Yeah, right. So cool. I love that. Simplify. Now, so this is going to kind of go into the category of kind of breaking things down and simplifying it. But just for, all the listeners, like in simple terms, what is exercise science?
Well, so yeah, it's a pretty broad umbrella. It's a big umbrella, but at its core, I think, is the study of movement. Okay. And so at various levels. So that could be the mechanics of movement, from like biomechanics, like how does, like measuring angles and looking at someone's form when they lift or run. Physiologically, what has to happen with the heart and the blood flow and oxygen getting delivered and carbon dioxide getting picked up and nutrients getting delivered. And down to, and nowadays it's really gone molecular. So what is happening with the individual within the cells? What is happening with the individual molecules that get what we call upregulated? So they get activated when you exercise or do certain types of training, and deactivated when we don't exercise, or if we get over obese, or if we do certain things.
Okay, so branching off from what is exercise science, kind of like let's just say maybe within the last 5 years or less, what's kind of been like one of the most interesting or significant like scientific discoveries in terms of exercise, or you can maybe it can be nutrition, but kind of just within the health and fitness realm. What's something that you've come across that's like the most interesting or significant scientific discovery, like I said, within like the last 5 years?
Okay, I'm going to give two things quickly.
Cool.
One is from a molecular level, they're seeing all these molecules that are activated when we move. And so even just standing, so now we're seeing the standing desk and stuff versus sitting. We know that all these enzymes are turned on when we stand up versus sitting. And so the importance of movement at a molecular level. I think the other biggest area is this movement, and this is one I'm probably a little more passionate about, this long-term athletic development movement. We've seen this ridiculous push to train little kids like professionals. And like you said, it's like the PE approach is the right one. Make it fun. You want them to have fun so that they sign up again the next season. Like we shouldn't train little kids like we do college and professional athletes. It needs to be fun. They need to be well-rounded, athletes doing all types of movements, and but also the understanding that we can strength train kids, like, that they can get them in the weight room, but it can be fun and And that we need to think long term, not about this season. And so this strive, I think, to get the coaches of youth sports to understand that it doesn't matter winning right now. You're thinking about the long term consequences of what you're doing with those kids, not this season, because really, who cares? You need to think long term. And so kids, they develop at different stages, and so sometimes those kids who were superstars are starting to see at a younger age, they're not even participating later. And then there were kids who maybe were awkward younger who actually become quite athletic later, and a lot of them are quitting because they weren't the superstar when they were a kid, and coaches didn't let them pitch or didn't let them do things and sat them on the bench because they cared about winning their season versus just getting these kids a good experience. So,
I want to extend that a little bit in terms of like injuries, because like that's something that I've seen. I feel like the more, because like when I was growing up, we played all sports, well-rounded. I was on the swim team and baseball, basketball, all the things, right? But I feel like as specialization has kind of dominated the youth sports scene, so we've got these kids where they're not playing all these different sports and being exposed to all these different experiences, but they're playing basketball year round, they're playing volleyball year round, football year round. I mean, it's like these parents, like by the age of 10, it's like you've got to choose like football, or you're gonna do swimming or whatever. But then, I feel like I'm seeing a lot more injuries, a lot more like knees getting blown out. And I know there's a family acquaintance that this girl, she was a All-American softball pitcher and on all these traveling teams and AAU and all this stuff. And she I don't think she's just like 20 or 21, and she has to have 2 hip surgeries. Yeah. I'm like, my dad was telling me this, I'm like, whoa, like if that's not a red flag for youth sports, I don't know what is. But I want you to maybe just, since you said you're kind of passionate about this stuff, speak on the importance of the kids not only having fun in youth sports, but participating in multiple youth sports and not being so focused on the specialization.
Yeah, so not only mentally from a burnout, but physically, you're absolutely right. Every single conference I've gone to in the last 15 to 20 years, they have talked about getting away from the single sport specialization for kids, and they'll talk about, physicians have said it for the injuries, and there's been specials on 10 and 12-year-olds having ACL surgery. We have we have those types of injuries. I heard a trainer who worked with down in New Orleans, Tulane. No, well, he did work with the Saints some too, but also Tulane in their baseball program. At a conference, he talked about they do an MRI on all their incoming baseball players, especially their pitchers, on their elbows. Well, they were seeing the elbows of 40-year-old baseball players in 18-year-olds because these kids are at these tournaments year-round, playing for these big rings down south, when they're 8 years old. So they're seeing these trophic changes, these growth changes in the joints and all that they typically shouldn't see for another 20 years of extensive participation in kids. So every trainer, coach, doctor, therapist, they're all saying the same thing: don't specialize your kids. And so at some point, but people aren't listening, they just get this panic and, well, I got to get my kid a college scholarship. Well, in a lot of these sports, the scholarships aren't that. You're better off not spending all that money on that travel sport and putting it in a savings account for the kid, because there aren't too many great, they might be surprised how many baseball players actually get a full ride scholarship, and so, those things are, I think, it's driving people. And then you even get kids in college who are so burnt out on their sport. But, I've had a coach tell me, well, how does a kid tell their parent who spent $50,000 on them over the last 10 years for their sport, traveling around, that they don't want to do it anymore, that it's not the right thing for them anymore. This is what they put all their money and focus on and energy for years. And so it just creates a lot of, so then you end up with kids on a college team who really don't want to be there, but they don't want to quit because they don't want to tell their parents. And, it's just, there's so many aspects, but the all around, like the more planes, we like baseball, you're pitching, the more repetitive an activity is, the greater the issues are. Baseball players, they're seeing young kids get overdeveloped, whatever their dominant side is, from throwing and batting over and over the same way, running, cycling, anything you're doing in the same motion over and over. It's a little better in the sports that mix it up, that move all around, like soccer and, basketball, because you're moving in a lot of different directions, which helps. But still, there's that, the pounding on the floor, the stress of whatever it is.
Yeah. One more thing in terms of youth. You mentioned earlier like strength training, and it's okay to get kids into the weight room. So obviously lifting weights is my jam. It's my thing. I'm super passionate about it, and I started lifting weights summer going to my 4th grade year. And I think probably, over the years some of the myths have been busted, but I think, parents probably are still, generally speaking, pretty leery in terms of allowing their kids to get into a weight room and start lifting weights because of, just different things. And I kind of understand it too, because we've come a long ways in terms of like strength and conditioning and high schools, but still, when you're from a small town like I am, and a lot of people here in the Midwest, like, you've got the football coach that's trying to run, the strength and conditioning program. Well, the football coach might be a great football coach, but more than likely in a small town, even in a big city, that football coach isn't a certified strength and conditioning specialist, doesn't have a exercise science degree, nothing like that. He's just putting something off of bodybuilding.com and saying, we're going to do something until we puke. So I understand some of that leeriness, but just in terms of actually lifting weights, strength training, resistance training for kids, is there anything that parents should be leery of in terms of like stunning their growth or hurting them, as they age?
I think as long as it's done reasonably, form first. So as long as the coach or whoever's working with them, or even as the parents, they can get on. There's reliable people online. There's a lot of these. If you do like the hashtag LTAD, the long-term athletic development, find people who are passionate about that, and they're posting videos all the time. We don't worry about, and some of my favorite arguments are they show, we don't worry about kids jumping down from a tree. The forces on their body are greater from that than trying to lift a heavy weight. But the biggest thing is, as long as they're getting taught, I think, the proper mechanics first before they focus on the stacking up the weight. And then if they do that and they develop the right way, allowing adequate rest, like you don't need to, bench press and squat every day. You gotta allow, at least one day in between, if not a couple, depending on how heavy. But I'd say, kids can, you can kind of go by how they feel, and are they enjoying it? Are they thriving on it? And every kid's different. This comes back, we have the principle of individuality. You just can't treat all the kids the same. So I'd say be leery of that. Any coach who, at any level, who approaches all their athletes and treats them the same. Because what isn't enough for one kid is going to be too much for another. And you just have to make sure they're making modifications for what's right for that person.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, so kind of coming back to college and the experience of college. What's and I kind of have my own personal perspective on, like, actually does kind of the question is, does everybody need to go to college? And I feel like there's been more talk about that lately. And again, I have my own personal opinion on that. What's as somebody that's a college professor and in academia for many years and things like that, and I'm sure you're very passionate about, I know you're passionate about teaching, you're passionate about the college experience, but this is the question that I have for you, Rebecca. Do you feel like, and you can answer this as a professor, you can answer this as a mom, however you kind of want to take it, do you feel like college is necessary for everyone?
Absolutely not.
Okay. And I want you to expound on that. Why not?
Not everyone will do the work. I mean, it's, I think for some people it's torture to sit in a classroom and to have to write essays and to, and a lot of fields you can be very successful going straight to working. Now, I do think technical programs are a great alternative just to elevate, to get certifications. Obviously, we can educate ourselves in a lot of ways. You don't need a college degree to learn how to do certain things for yourself. And we have lots of examples of people who have been very successful
Absolutely.
without a college degree. I think it's more about, are you motivated to learn what you need to learn and to get, any specializations you need for the field you're in, and to learn just, the business side. If you're having to deal with business things, like someone could start their own business because they're a skilled laborer. But okay, so either you need to learn the business side of it on your own, or take some classes, or hire someone who does.
Right.
So
cool. And that's kind of like right in line with, kind of where I'm at. Because like, obviously I got my degree here from the University of Sioux Falls, but the honest truth is that anybody can be a personal trainer. Because like my whole dream was like, I'm going to be a personal trainer, own my own gym. And I just went to college because that's what everybody was kind of doing, right? But looking back, has my college degree really gained me that much in almost 33 years? Not really. If I'm speaking the truth, like, because I can go be a personal trainer, I can spend $500 or $600 online and get a certification and become a personal trainer, right? Mm-hmm. And I've been in all kinds of interviews before I got my certification. I am like, they said, well, what certifications do you have? I'm like, I don't have any certifications. I have a bachelor's degree in exercise science. I spent 4 years and a lot of money to get this degree. And they're like, well, sorry, you have to have a certification. So that was really frustrating for me. And over the years, I've understood why you need to get the certification. It's legal stuff, but for me, it's just like, I look back at my life, I'm like, what has my degree, given to me in terms of like job or career? And so I feel like, I tell people, I'm like, really think about like the path if you can. I mean, sometimes it's hard when you're 18 or 19, but really think about the path that you want to take in life, the direction you want to go. And you don't have to go to college right out of high school. Yeah. I think it's smart to maybe go to like a junior college and get, save a lot of money, get all your gen eds done, transfer in, get your degree there. But I think it's okay for us to have this conversation with youth and younger people in terms of like, if you don't feel like college is for you right now, it's okay not to go. Because I feel like, I graduated high school in 2006 and I just felt like, I want to say I felt like the pressure was there, but that's what everybody was doing.
That's what you were going to do.
And if you don't go to college, if someone's like, well, what are you up to now after high school? It's like, well, I'm working at a convenience store or what have you. Like you kind of felt like somebody's like looking down upon you. It's like after 4 years, like what are you up to? I'm working at a convenience store. Did you go to college? No, I didn't. Like there was this kind of this societal pressure of like, if you don't have a college degree, like you're less than. Yeah. And I know a lot of people felt that. Maybe things have changed over the years, probably not a whole lot. But I feel like it's important for us to have the conversation, especially that's why I kind of want to bring this up with you, because you are a professor, you are involved in the college experience. I think it's important for us to tell young people, if you feel like college isn't for you now, that's okay. If you feel like college is never going to be for you, it's okay. If you feel like college is for you now, that's okay. If you want to wait for 4 years and then maybe go to college, that's okay. Yeah. Like, don't rush into anything, and if you don't feel like this college thing is for you, or you can make a great living or whatever you want to do with your life without college, it's okay, right?
Exactly. Cool. I fully agree. I think we put too much pressure on people. And a lot of times students will get here and not so much, I don't think we see it as much here as big state schools. Right. But, they go in and they kind of lose their minds because they're away from home for the first time, and anyone checks and balances, there's big parties, and they fail out, and then they have this debt, and they have to figure out how to deal with it. Now, is a college degree, is there value to it? Absolutely. Course, it's going to open up opportunities that might not be there otherwise, but not everyone's interested or well suited for those opportunities. So there's certainly very successful paths without a college degree.
Cool. So if somebody wants to, pursue academia, if they want to pursue becoming like a college professor, this is a great example. This is a smooth transition from what we were just talking about. College isn't for everybody, but I know that if you want to be a college professor, I think there's a pretty specific route that you have to take. So I would just like you kind of to speak on what are the absolute necessities if you want to pursue becoming a professor on a college campus, and then like, you know, is it important, because like most of the time if you go walk into an interview, they're going to ask you, or you're filling out a resume or whatever application, like what experience do you have? So you know, how does somebody, before they would maybe get an opportunity to be a professor, how do they get that experience? Kind of just unpack a little bit of that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, there's actually, you know, if you look across just our campus alone, there's been many paths, and mine's kind of a hooky one a little bit, you know, where I was kind of, it was not a straight path to be here. And if you had told me I'd be a college professor some day, I would have laughed at you, because I've even told my boss, like, how did a big goofball like me end up as this distinguished job title? You know, even though I'm non-distinguished, it's a distinguished title.
It is,
And, but, you know, some of my colleagues, they like I remember one, Dr. Bender talked about his first day of class, like his freshman year. He sat in class and he was just mesmerized by the professor, and he thought, that's what I want to do. And he just set his arrow at that target and he worked diligently towards it. And within a few years, there he was.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it was a long route. For others, you know, I have one of our psychology faculty. She was an accountant for a while. And then went into counseling for a while, and then felt drawn into teaching. But, you know, there's certain absolute, you know, what I recommend for our students is, you know, some people go straight from an undergrad to a PhD. I think a master's program is nice if you're thinking about it, because it kind of, again, each time you do something, kind of opens more doors. But a master's allows you to see what all's out there without overly committing. It's doable. You won't lose your mind, you know, and being like just tired out and working ridiculous hours and things to try to figure out what you want to do. But it helps you hone in and then find the right program for you if you do want to go on and get a doctorate.
Yeah.
You know, you know, it depends on your field. Like our field, I feel like you can get jobs. It seems like, you know, there are jobs out there. Some fields like English and history, you know, they say when they open up theology, they open up a job opening, they'll get 100 applications. So, you know, a lot of really qualified people have a hard time getting college teaching jobs.
Yeah.
One thing is, a lot of people sometimes, I think, look down their nose at community colleges. Actually, like, community colleges are amazing. Like, I've gone to some conferences that were primarily community college faculty. One of my best friends teaches at community college. They're amazing, and they are teaching focused. You know, these smaller schools like USF were focused on the student and teaching versus research. And so these community colleges, you can have some phenomenal, probably sometimes better classroom experiences than at a lot of four-year schools, because you're going to have smaller classes and they really know how to teach. They teach their faculty how to teach.
Right.
Whereas at bigger schools, they just assume you know how to teach.
Yeah.
So they do a lot of continuing ed and all in the smaller schools and community colleges. So I've been really impressed with what I've learned about community colleges.
So do you, because I mean, I know your story is that, you know, you had started your PhD and you didn't complete it. You had your master's degree, but USF still hired you here and you were able to teach, you know, kind of under the understanding that you're going to work towards getting your PhD. So is that something that is pretty uncommon or not?
I would say it's not uncommon. It's, you know, again, it depends on the field. Like some fields, people have their PhD. Other ones, sometimes, like, so I had part of mine done, so that you know, you see that a lot, and so maybe people have to finish their dissertation or something. Okay.
So a PhD isn't an absolute requirement to become a professor then.
No, and at community colleges, just a master's degree. But at schools that have tenure, like if you want to get tenure, usually you have to have a terminal degree, which most of the time is either a PhD or an EDD or it's whatever the highest degree in your field is. Kind of, there's a threshold, you know. And so if you want long-term job stability, and some positions are automatically tenure track, so if you weren't willing to get the terminal degree, you're not going to get the job. But there are places you can teach without it, with a master's degree.
So how does somebody? Because I know there's, like, you know, when you're in when you're going to get like your graduate degree and things like that, like there's TA positions, teaching assistants. Is that something that you, with like, you know, your students and things like that, you advise? Is that something that you try to encourage them to pursue?
Absolutely.
To get that experience in the classroom.
And I tell
teaching?
them, and like if they're a good student, they shouldn't pay for their graduate program. So look for places where they could do the TA or the graduate assistant. So there's different types of graduate assistantship. Some they're teaching classes. Some you're working in a lab. Some you're out at high school doing athletic training, or at the college doing athletic training, or different, you know, some like here we have graduate assistantships. They're resident directors in the dorms, you know, but they can get their master's degree. And so, I try to, if you don't have to, don't pay for your master's, you know, look for those opportunities. And
cool. I want to ask you, because the University of Sioux Falls is a liberal arts, you know, college, and my first college, Central in Pella, Iowa, was a liberal arts school. Transferred here, USF is liberal arts. Honestly, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't even care. I was like, I'm just going to college, right? But after I was here at USF, and I was quote unquote forced to take like a music class, and like you're like, oh, we sit down next semester with, you know, Dr. Schultz to go through what class I had taken. Like, oh, well, Quentin, you got to meet this requirement. You got to take an acting class, or I'm like, oh my gosh, like, are you kidding me? Like, well, you got to do the graduate. Okay, whatever. Put me in this acting class, which actually turned out to be okay. But so I didn't understand that, and some of the listeners might not understand that. But now, as I'm older and I went through my liberal arts experience, I do appreciate it, because I don't want to say forced, but I was, you know, part of the liberal arts experience and education is that you're going to take some classes outside of, like, you know, exercise science or whatever your specific degree is, and it's kind of encouraged to have this, you know, I would say a fuller experience, right? So why, you know, do you appreciate, and why would you encourage, you know, people to pursue, you know, an education in terms of like college and more like liberal arts than maybe like a big public school?
So I was like you. My mom was like, oh, you need to go to a liberal arts school, and I had no idea what that meant. I'm like, well, what kind of conservative? Why would I go to a liberal school?
That's awesome.
I mean, that was my basis of understanding.
That's good. I like it.
So then I hated those generals requirements, the liberal arts core at my college, and I just didn't appreciate it at the time. And again, like you know, you get older. And you're listening to late night comedians, they make references to things, and because of your liberal arts degree, you actually get it. You know, what is Machiavelli? When someone says, oh, you know, so and so is Machiavelli, you're like, oh, I get that, because we studied it in LAR, you know. And so for me, like, I didn't appreciate it till much later, and it actually drew me to teach our freshman course in the liberal arts core. It's a composition, but also kind of a Western Civ type course, you know. And so I agreed to teach it because I thought, you know, I couldn't stand that course when I was a student, because the people who taught were very stuffy, and, you know, what is art? And and like, it's like for people like you and I, you just, you know, you immediately shut down, right? Because you're like, come on. But now, you know, so I try to approach it with a little more like, okay, what does this mean to you right now? Like, okay, so why should you care about this? And we really try to, you know, and it sounds canned and stuffy, but it's true, you know. People, you start to see, well, we can change jobs a lot. And so, you know, our goal with a liberal arts degree is to make it where you can think outside the box, think creatively, think independently, communicate well. Those are skills that you need for any job, you know. And I try to tell students, you know, most employers, no one's going to care what your GPA was, you know, your test scores, you know, they're going to say, are you likable? Are you trainable? You know, are you going to show up and do a good job? Can you adjust when something goes haywire? And so hopefully that is what you're getting out of a liberal arts degree, is the ability to adjust to shifting times, you know, with coronavirus, everyone getting shifted to working at home and stuff. Okay, well, do you have the skills you need to keep your job working from home and managing that? And how are you going to approach your job effectively now but in a different way.
Right.
Even if you're not working from home, we've all had to make adjustments because of it.
Yeah. So basically, simply, like a liberal arts education, it's and I want you to add on if I don't say this right, but I guess my wording is like it's just a broader education experience. Is that
so
fair to say,
if we literally translate liberal arts, it means the free arts, and so it's but yeah, it's to be broadly educated would be, if you ask 60 different faculty members to define it, you'd get 60
right.
That won't surprise you, but you get 60 different answers, but it's really that broader education. We're not training you for a trade or a specific job. We're training you to be better thinkers and communicators and problem solvers, and so that you could work any job and be effective. Not just, what happens if you can no longer be a plumber? Well, if that's what you were trained for, it might be tricky to do other things. Whereas
for sure,
if you have something else backing that up, or an exercise physiologist, I trained to be a personal trainer. Well, what if you can't get a job as a personal trainer? What else can you do? Well, because of your degree, you can do a lot of things. You had a business class, you had, and you can at least, if nothing else, talk intelligently to people at a dinner party. You at least kind of understand what they're talking about,
Right, yeah. And that's something, too, I know. And I'm sure this might be something, a general class for a lot of colleges, but I know here at the University of Sioux Falls, like again, I don't want to use the word force, but one of the classes I had to take was, like a speech class, and we had to, come up with
communications,
communications, whatever it's called. You got all the technical terms. I'm just throwing stuff out.
It's not just a speech class,
but I know it's not. But that's one of the classes I look back, because you had to, sometimes the professor would pick topics and you'd have to give a speech in front of your classmates, and obviously the professor, and get graded, all this stuff. You get feedback.
Talk to each other.
Sometimes I got to pick my topic. Obviously, I always like that better. Yeah. But anyways, I really appreciated, probably in the moment when you told me I had to take that class, whatever semester I had to take it, I was like, oh, that's dumb, whatever. But now I do appreciate that I had to take that class, because I had to stand up in front of people, which that's like one a lot of people's greatest fear. And that's being able to stand up in front of a group of people and communicate effectively. There's not very many life skills that's more important and more powerful for any type of job or career that you're going to pursue.
Agreed.
So what I guess I'm trying to say is, I look back on this liberal arts education, I am thankful that I, had the opportunity to take some different classes that I probably wouldn't have chosen, because it did teach me some life skills that are very, very valuable and important. And again, I just look back when I'm 18, 19, 20 years old in college, it's like, you think you know what you want to do with your life, but man, my life is the epitome of completely going in an opposite direction I thought I was going to in a lot of different areas of my life. But I'm just thankful that I had those experiences to stand up in front of my peers and professors and give a speech. And even tying it into exercise science, I know, and I'm sure this is probably still a requirement, but when in order for me to graduate, I had to, take this class called colloquium. I had to do this big research. It's the hardest I ever studied in my life. You have to stand up in front of peers and a lot of professors. You get graded on presentations and your references and all this. That, and it's a big thing, because, not only are you standing up in front of people and having to present research, but it's a requirement in order for you to get your degree. But even that, I look back on that specific experience and the work that I put in, the research and all these things that I learned kind of in that experience, that gave me a great experience and great tools for things that I've done in later years. So I just think that as people are maybe listening to this, parents, younger people, and they're trying to figure out maybe the college things, maybe the parents didn't go to college, they want their kids to go to college, I really would encourage parents and kids to look at, a liberal arts education, and especially if you don't even know what that really is, look into it, because not every college is the same. That was my mindset, and it was like, okay, I'm going to go to Central College, I'm going to go to USF College, this college. It's like it's all the same. It's really not. You can go to University of South Dakota, you're going to have a completely different experience than the University of Sioux Falls, right? Yeah. So I just want to encourage the listeners to look into different colleges, visit campuses if you have that opportunity, which you all do, but really look into a liberal arts education, because I feel like, I don't want to say it's a better education, but there's just some different experiences within that education.
There are a lot of positives. Yeah. In fact, I had a student once, he wanted to be a police officer, and in my freshman comp, he goes, why do I have to learn how to write? I'm going to be a cop. And I said, are you kidding me? I said, the first police report you write up, and that person goes into before the judge, and their lawyer is going to tear this up if it's not a well-written report,
Yeah, of course.
And so there's so many areas that I think people don't think about, that communication piece is critical.
It's everything. All right, so we're going to kind of move towards the finish line here. I want to touch on a couple more things, kind of tying into kind of being prepared for changing times. In the 10 years that I've been out of college, I look at, the health and fitness space, and specifically because of social media, it's completely changed. I mean, you can literally not have any education, you can have no certifications, basically no experience. You can open up an Instagram account, have some abs, have a nice body, and you can literally make millions of dollars just through Instagram, through social media, within the fitness space and all these different spaces. And I look back and I'm like, man, going to college, it's like, social media didn't even, we had Facebook, but social media 10 years ago is not what it is today. I mean, Instagram wasn't a thing. I mean, Twitter was just starting to be a thing. Facebook was kind of there. But the business side of social media, specifically focusing on health and fitness, because that's kind of our thing, how have you seen, social media change health and fitness, and maybe the way that you educate, or you guys as professors kind of approach health and fitness and exercise science, how you educate, how you teach your students? How has social media kind of altered that or changed that, if at all?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, and I try to tell students, in fact, sometimes I have assignments in classes where they have to be on Twitter and tweeting.
That's cool.
They have to retweet, they have to follow professionals. And I tell them, you have to understand how this works, and you need to use it, because not only is it a marketing tool for yourself or your business, it's also a way for you to connect with your clients, your patients, whoever, to be a motivator, whatever it is. And there's so many avenues, and I think people don't even know. And I'm amazed at how many students are hesitant or don't already have a Twitter account. I'm like, are you kidding me? Yeah. How can you not in this day and age? And I know, part of me doesn't want to promote it, but that's the reality. And
it's not going anywhere.
No,
it's not. It's here.
And people are expecting that, and they want to go to your social media presence to see, what is your business about? What are you about? And everything you put on there is going to be examined. And and how to be careful with what you're doing. And we really tried to hit that with them. But and there's so many you can learn so much just by following professionals. And, I started doing the KUFIZ hashtag to try to connect our students. And then if I read something interesting, I'll retweet it with the KUFIZ hashtag. Cool. So our students have a place to go, here's some resources in our field, because we can't teach you everything. Like you said, when you were going back to being certified versus why have a degree, I'd say it's kind of in this range of 50-50. Part of it is real life skills and expertise, and just getting in the weight room and training yourself and figuring it out. And part of it, that education component. Now, do you need a college degree for it? No, you can teach yourself, but sometimes it's easier to have someone else teach it to you. But you've got to have that book knowledge to go with the applied knowledge. And I think there's a blend there that it becomes really quality.
Absolutely.
And that's where you look at, okay, what is this person's background, or how does it hold up to what they're saying compared to others? And so part of it is navigating through the untruths, and part of it is finding good resources of people to follow who can help really elevate your game, whatever that is.
And and that's why, with the podcasting and stuff, it's just unbelievable, Rebecca, because that's how I get most of my, that's how I get all my continued education. Is just I can be food prepping, I can be doing whatever, and I can be listening to a podcast, I can be on the elliptical or whatever. But I guess just adding on to what you said, just encouraging again the listeners and anybody out there that's interested in, maybe they're in college and they're pursuing an exercise science or kinesiology degree, or they want to open up their own gym or anything fitness. Like, you're a fool if you don't have a social media presence. And Facebook is kind of a thing that's kind of like for us kind of quote unquote older people, but like I cannot encourage people enough, stress people enough in health and fitness, especially like with Instagram. Like it's just another tool, to add to your toolbox in terms of you being, successful and being visible.
Absolutely.
Now, it might within health and fitness, it depends kind of what you're doing. But if you're going to be a personal trainer, if you're going to have your own gym, anything like that, it's like the more free publicity and
Yes.
the more name recognition that you have out there, the more opportunities you have to promote. Like, social media, for the most part, it's free.
Exactly.
So, like,
it's free advertising.
it's free advertisement. And like you said, I love that you do the hashtag KooFizz, because it's like, social media is a great way that we can connect with, our peers. We can connect with, clients and different businesses and see how different people are doing different things. But like, I love how you use that hashtag, because again, like, it's just another opportunity for people to, stay connected, be connected, and work together. And that's why it's like, with social media, it's like, it's here to stay. Don't resist it. You don't have to be a social media guru or completely
junkie and on it all day long. Yeah.
Right. But at least be open to using it to better yourself. Like I do, that's where I get a lot of my continued education, and use it as a tool to better your business, because I just feel like, things have changed so much in the 10 years I've been out of college, and I don't know, I haven't sat in a college class for years, but like, I hope that a lot of, colleges and professors, especially within health and fitness and exercise science and kinesiology, just understand, which it sounds like you do, just the absolute necessity of at least being familiar with social media. Because you know what, you go, I've been in a lot of different interviews, and if I go in there and say, hey, I have my own podcast, I know how to, do Instagram, I can do this, like that is like, out in Colorado, I, did an interview at this, I think it was a chiropractic office, and it was going to have me do some personal training. And, on my resume, I said something about having a podcast and, being proficient in social media. He said, the reason why I called you in to have this interview, Quentin, is because of that specifically. He's like, he's an older gentleman. He's like, I don't know how to do that. I need somebody that can do that.
Yeah.
So, again,
he knows that he needs to do that for his business.
For the advertising. So just, again, encouraging people, like, just to be open to social media and at least learn to be proficient in it, because it's only going to benefit you.
Absolutely.
All right. So, one thing here before I ask you the final couple questions, I just want to touch on, Rebecca, is just kind of like motherhood. I know, you've mentioned throughout your story and our conversation today, it sounds like that's something you kind of always wanted. You wanted to have kids, and, you kind of have, made some life decisions and career decisions in terms of like, well, I know someday I want to have kids and have a family, right? And I know that's a big part of who you are and things like that. So just kind of motherhood, specifically having kids. I know you have 3 kids. You mentioned your oldest daughter just graduated. What is kind of that meant to you, motherhood, and then maybe just like what's maybe kind of a lesson or two throughout these experiences with your kids that you've kind of learned from them?
Okay. Well, it's like the best and the hardest and the worst job.
Yeah, all in one, right?
All in one, You just, it's so awesome when everyone's getting along, and it's so awful when they're not, and they're not listening, and they're talking back. But I just, I love being a mom. I love my kids. They drive me insane sometimes. I don't know, like anyone who's ever watched it. Just recently, a friend told me about The Middle, the show. It was on Fox like for years, I think, and we've been watching it on Amazon Prime. And it's about this family with 3 kids. Just, there's this boy, girl, and we're girl, boy, girl, but it's, totally ridiculous, but it just struck a nerve. Like, we laugh every single episode because there's so many aspects of it, like, we could totally relate to, and sometimes you're almost embarrassed you could relate to it, because you're like, that's the kind of parents we are, lazy, tired, right. and then, so like, I feel like if you want to know what parenthood is like, a little bit, watch The Middle, because that'll, prime you up for it. But, it's one of those things where I feel like I mess up all the time, but, I have great kids and you just say, I'm sorry, I messed up, and we reset and, they mess up and they say they're sorry and we reset and it's exhausting, but it's awesome.
Right.
It's actually been kind of nice when things shut down. Not that we don't overly do activities, but with 3 kids, it fills up quickly your week, and so it's just been kind of nice just to be a little more relaxed and do more things. We've bought some things for around the house to do, like the cornhole and we got a basketball hoop put in and just things like that. We ride our bikes through our neighborhood and swim in the neighborhood lake, and so those are the things you just love about being a parent. So.
Yeah. What's like? I mean, what's that kind of that one thing that maybe you and your husband, when you guys have the conversation, or just maybe you when you're kind of thinking about it, what's kind of like that one value, or what's that kind of that one thing that you hope all 3 of your kids, from their upbringing by you and your husband, what's kind of that one thing, that one value that you hope that you guys can instill in them?
Oh, well, that first and foremost, that they know Christ as their personal Savior, because everything else means nothing after, if they don't have that. And so that's really our starting point. And my husband's actually really good about talking about that all the time.
Cool.
And so we really try to keep that aspect very strong and in front of them at all times. And then I think we also try to do your best with whatever you do. And with some kids that's easier, like the firstborn, with her we're like, okay, you don't have to do it that good, you don't have to be the best all the time, right. But the other ones, like, okay, you could do you could do better. So
and your youngest, just from being Facebook friends for all these years, your youngest one seems to be kind of the fireball.
Oh,
huh?
She is. She's the Quentin. Yes, she's.
Hopefully she's not quite that wild and crazy.
I would say she is going down the freeway of life, standing on the handlebars. She is just full of life and energy and fun, and she has the biggest heart. She's going to be the one who takes care of us in our old age. So.
Yeah, and we were talking about this before we turned on the mic, but she was born my final semester here, because we were talking about, because we had I mentioned the colloquium, and you weren't able to come because you'd had her a couple months before, so I was like, oh man, but I did all this work for Rebecca and then she wasn't there. That's okay. You had a kid, it's all good. Yeah. So okay, so I just kind of, before I ask you the last question, I just kind of want to give you the opportunity, Rebecca. If there's maybe, we've had a very thorough conversation, touched on a lot of things. Is there any kind of like final words or any final thoughts that you kind of would like to leave with the listeners?
Oh boy.
No pressure. If there's nothing, it's okay. It's all good. I just, we've talked about a lot. So I if there's anything you kind of want to just share, wrapping it up, that's cool. If not, it's all right. I'll just ask you the last question.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. All right. So, what sets your soul on fire?
Oh boy. I think personal connections, people. Yeah. So for me, it always comes down to that. Like, I'm kind of an introvert, but at the same time, just that I don't have a ton of friends. I have a few really good friends. And so that's what I love. And some of my best friends from high school, we still keep in touch. We think and approach things very differently, but we really value each other as people and those different perspectives. And so I think at the core, that's what I love.
That's beautiful. And that's something that I've, as I've, last several years, living out in Colorado, I've just really found for myself personally the significance of, just that human connection. You know what I mean? Because I've kind of always done my own thing and been a bit of a loner and stuff, right? But it's something that God's put within us to be connected with other humans, and not just as acquaintances, but really having that deep connection. So that's beautiful. Before I kind of wrap things up here and do my outro, I've got to share this story, and I mentioned I mentioned this to you, and you're like, oh, I don't really remember this, but it's been probably brought up on the podcast, kind of me talking to different people. I know I've told this story a million times, but my one Dr. Schultz, Rebecca Schultz story that I have to share with everybody is so I was taking one of your classes, and myself and the guy I mentioned earlier, Chad Traver, we went to high school together, and then we went to USF for a couple years together. But we were in one of your classes. I don't know what it was, but we had taken a quiz, and both of us were, we weren't your best academic students ever, to say the least. But we took a quiz, and you called us up, and we both got S on the quiz. But I got a higher percentage than Chad did. And so I was like, yes. I was like, I got, a 48, and Chad got a 46 or whatever it was. And I remember, in your mom voice, you didn't yell at me, but you're like, Quentin, you both failed. Knock it off. I'm like, oh man. I was like, well, whatever. I don't care. I beat Chad, so it's all good. Yeah. But I've told that story so many times that I wanted to make sure I shared it with you. And I've wanted to have you on my podcast for a long time, Rebecca, because and I kind of touched on this earlier, but just to be really honest and truthful with you, you have my Iowa mom, my biological mom, I have my South Dakota mom, I have my Colorado mom, but my time at USF there's some high highs and some low lows, mm-hmm. and some of my toughest days in my life were here at the University of Sioux Falls, just personally. And I know you don't know, any of this stuff, but, I really struggled with anxiety and just some different things personally here, especially my first year. And it was really hard. It was really tough for me. And I was, I was an ass early on at USF, again, to say the least. But, you're
stubborn.
Very stubborn. Yeah, I'm still stubborn, but hopefully not an ass. But, you were somebody that, again, you met me where I was at. You didn't ever yell at me, but I know that you held me to a high standard. I always felt that you knew that I was capable of more, and you held me to that. So you were a very strong influence in my life in my early 20s during my time at USF. And so I just want to thank you for that, and I really want to thank you for sharing your story, coming onto the podcast, and just having this conversation with me.
Well, thanks, Gwen. And I did think of something then to leave the list.
Please,
so,
yes, yeah.
You've done the same for me, because I don't know if you remember when you came to visit. I think it was the last time you came and visited me here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you said God had really placed on your heart that he felt like he was trying to have a revival at USF, mm-hmm. and that I was going to be mm-hmm. key in that. And shortly after that, I was selected to be the faculty chair. And I feel like, that was... to kind of put this call on my, next several years. And since then, I always come back to that and thinking, this I guess, vision God casted for you through me, and I take it seriously. And I try to think of that every time when there's tough conversations. I'm like, okay, I need to stand with truth and God with this. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for that. I think we all, need to be held accountable in different ways. And sometimes you just need someone, hey, this is why you're here at this time, and why certain things are falling your way. And so I appreciate you for that too.
And I remember coming to see you, but I honestly don't remember I said that. So
it's
cool.
You
did,
it's
cool.
Yeah.
But
mm-hmm.
very, very good. So So thank you, Rebecca. We've been going for almost 2 hours. Been a fun conversation. I just want to thank all you 127 Fit podcast listeners once again for tuning into the podcast. Your listening ears are always greatly appreciated. If you would like to find out more about the guests that I'm bringing onto the podcast, or if you'd like to find out more about myself personally, you can find that information on Instagram. It's at 127fit. Facebook is at Quentin Vars. LinkedIn is at Quentin Vars. If you guys would do me a huge favor and please leave a 5-star rating and review, and also subscribe to the podcast, especially in the iTunes Apple Podcast app, that would be greatly appreciated. If you guys are interested in some personal training, now that the COVID stuff is kind of behind us and things are starting to open up a little bit more, especially here in the Midwest. If you guys are interested in some personal training, I can do in-person personal training or virtual personal training, anything from weight loss, muscle gain, athletic performance. I would at least love to have a conversation with you and discuss some of your health and fitness goals. You can just send me an email. That email is 127fit@gmail.com if you are interested in any type of personal training, or if you just kind of want to figure out some goals in terms of, again, health and fitness. Just reach out to me through that email or through the social media. If you think you would be a great guest, or if you have a friend or an acquaintance you think would be a great guest or guest for the 127 Fit podcast, you can also just send me an email and just kind of, give me a little bit of your background, or give this email out to that friend or an acquaintance, and we'll just kind of go from there. Again, that email, 127fit@gmail.com. And one other huge favor I'd ask of all of you listeners, as you are finding great value in a specific episode or episodes of the 127 Fit podcast, as I know you are, I would just ask that you would take that specific episode or episodes that you're finding that value in and share it on your Facebook and Instagram stories using the hashtag #BeSomeoneToFollow. And per the usual, I will leave you all with Proverbs 24:10, which states, "If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small." This time, until next time, I will catch you guys later.